Hello, I'm Jan Szrewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Now, on this episode, we're diving into why Kazakhstan announced it's turning to China for nuclear power development. If you're thinking, wait, isn't Kazakhstan already rich in natural resources? You're absolutely right. This is a country that's basically sitting on a treasure chest of uranium, oil and gas. But the thing is, Kazakhstan's decision isn't just about energy. It's a strategic choice that sends a very loud, very clear message to the rest of the world. Hey, Russia, we're not putting all of our eggs in your basket anymore. And hey, America, we're not exactly swiping right on you either. Instead, they're sliding into China's DMs with a message that says, let's build something nuclear together. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Kazakhstan is on the precipice of building its first nuclear power plant. The question remains, however, as to who will build it. Russia has so far been regarded as the leading candidate for this venture, but a new player has entered the arena. China has been boosting its relations with Kazakhstan over the last few years. Now Beijing wants in on what it sees as the most important peaceful nuclear project in the region. By offering a very competitive price for its reactors and additional infrastructure support, it's looking to snag the prize right from under Moscow's nose. For Kazakhstan, this power plant and all future facilities are essentially a matter of life and death. Without them, Kazakhstan will be unable to sufficiently meet its electricity demands.
We need to increase production and restore everything. If we don't do this now, we simply won't have enough electricity.
In 2024, Kazakhstan's citizens voted in a nationwide referendum on whether they wanted their government to build the country's first nuclear power plant. Just over 73% of Kazakhs voted yes, with a turnout rate just shy of 64%. The power plant is to be built near the town of Ulkan.
And now we're zoning in on the east-splaining portion of our show. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, China has been slowly building itself up as a partner for Kazakhstan. These efforts have intensified in recent years, as Russia's attention has been captured by the war in Ukraine, and China looks to build itself as Asia's leading power. Here is more.
To say that China is merely interested in Kazakhstan would be an understatement. The two countries share a border that is almost 1,800 kilometers long, and to avoid friction, they must be partners. Beijing sees its interests in the partnership from both a strategic and economic point of view. Kazakhstan is a crucial part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, as it is the main transit hub. Geopolitically, a strong, more independent Kazakhstan may also serve as a counterweight to Russia in the region, which works in China's favor. In terms of the economy, Kazakhstan is incredibly rich in various resources, such as oil, gas, uranium, and of course rare earths. These are vital to China's energy security and booming high-tech industry, which means that Beijing will do much to ensure that it has priority when it comes to trading for these resources. There is also an internal aspect to China's relationship with Kazakhstan, as it sees Astana as an ally in fighting off what Beijing has labeled religious extremism in the Xinjiang province.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Now, why is all of this such a big deal, you may ask? Well, for starters, it's a geopolitical signal that Kazakhstan is diversifying its alliances. Historically, they have been in Russia's orbit, like a little moon circling a very grumpy planet. But with Russia's global reputation currently at an all-time low, Kazakhstan is looking for new friends. And who better than China, a country that's basically the overachieving kid in the global classroom? You know, the one who's good at everything: economics, infrastructure, surveillance, and now apparently nuclear power too. But let's not forget, this is about the global balance of power. By partnering with China, Kazakhstan is essentially saying, we see where the wind is blowing and it smells like dumplings and Huawei phones. And that is a big deal, because it shows how China's influence is expanding, not just in Asia, but globally. Of course, this move isn't without its risks. For once, Kazakhstan is putting itself in a position where it could become overly dependent on China. And if history has taught us anything, it's that being overly dependent on a superpower is never going to end well. Just ask Sri Lanka, which is currently drowning in Chinese debt, like it's a Titanic and Beijing is the iceberg. But Kazakhstan's leaders are betting that the benefits outweigh the risks. They are hoping that by partnering with China, they can modernize their energy sector, boost their economy, and maybe even gain some leverage in their dealings with Russia. It is a bold move, and one that could reshape the geopolitical landscape in ways we can't even predict yet. It's also a reminder that the world is changing fast, alliances are shifting, power dynamics are evolving, and countries like Kazakhstan are making moves that could have ripple effects far beyond their borders. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Bruce Pannier, board member of the Caspian Policy Center. Hello and welcome back to Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk Kazakhstan's nuclear ambitions. For quite a while they wanted to build a nuclear power plant, and it seemed like it was a done deal for the Russians. But now apparently China is bringing an offer to the table that is simply too good to be ignored.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of an amazing announcement. Nuclear power plants usually cost at least $10 billion. And of course, Kazakhstan's looking for one that has 2 reactors. So you'd have to figure $12–15 billion minimum or something like that. So all of a sudden for China to show up with this offer that was just a little bit under $5.5 billion is absolutely amazing. I mean, it's almost too good to pass up.
Isn't that too good to be true, though? Like, if they're undercutting the competition by more than half of the price, and we're talking competition from Russia, South Korea, France, isn't that a bit suspicious? Do you think there is a risk that the costs will start rising once the contract is concluded?
Yeah, that is almost inevitable with any nuclear power plant that you build. These things don't get built in just a couple of years. It's a decade-long process of building this, and over the course of a decade, costs are bound to go up. Some of them are legitimate, and some of them are just tacked on by the producer. The Russian one, Rosatom, has their bid, and as I mentioned, for a nuclear power plant, for Rosatom to build one with two reactors, probably be about $15 billion. But even in Kazakhstan, they were saying, by the end, it could be over $20 billion. So the Chinese deal is no different than that. It sounds really good, $5.5 billion. And possibly the Chinese will come in somewhere around that figure. What the Chinese are doing in the meantime is offering a bunch of other incentives to Kazakhstan. So it's the low price for the nuclear power plant. It's China helping Kazakhstan to develop what they call full cycle, from raw uranium coming up under the ground to producing nuclear fuel for use in reactors already. Of course, the financing, which Russia would have provided also, but China said that they're willing to finance the construction of the nuclear power plant. There's a lot of other things that the Chinese have put into this to sweeten the deal, so to speak, and make it not only a low price, but with additional benefits and business investments in other parts of the production cycle.
Aren't these investments, these incentives, what really counts here? Because with Russia, it's always the problem of being on a leash a bit. When there are geopolitical issues to be resolved, when there is pressure to be applied, Russia could always, for example, restrict the supply of nuclear fuel. With China, naturally, it's not something that gives you a free rein either. But at least Kazakhstan doesn't have such negative experiences with China as it has with Russia, being a former part of the Soviet Union. Do you think that this is likely, perhaps, to tip the scales in favor of China? Not just the price, but actually all these other issues there.
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly help. I should mention that, of course, there's a Chinese-Kazakhstan joint venture in Kazakhstan. It's at the Oba metallurgical plant in northeastern Kazakhstan. And they're actually producing fuel bundles for nuclear power plants right now, which are all being exported to China at the moment. So China has already helped Kazakhstan to produce some of the essential elements for powering a nuclear power plant. And it's already there on site in Kazakhstan too. So this is a good, another incentive for Kazakhstan to take a close look at this. But you're right that, it would be good to have something that have a partner that you didn't have to worry would pressure you so much. We've seen in other areas of industry in Kazakhstan how Russia is able to use its economic and political levers to pressure Kazakhstan at inopportune moments for Kazakhstan, I suppose. I mean, the primary one and the best example I can think of is when, after Russia started its launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Kazakhstan it certainly didn't support it. And later, of course, said that they would never recognize any of these. I believe the word they used was pseudo states and quasi states, meaning the eastern part of Ukraine that Russia was occupying, Luhansk, Donetsk, those places. And Kazakhstan said they wouldn't announce it. Well, right about that time, for the first time in 20 years, all of a sudden there was problems with the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which pumps 80% of Kazakhstan's oil goes through this pipeline that ends up in Novorossiysk at the Black Sea port, Russia's Black Sea port at Novorossiysk. All of a sudden they had problems with the port, and they had 4 different times that year. They had problems where they had to suspend operations temporarily. Again, this is 80% of Kazakhstan's oil exports. So if we're looking at the nuclear power plant and Russia starts building it, what's to say that if Kazakhstan says something or does something that the Kremlin takes issue with, that there won't be a holdup in construction or some other detail that all of a sudden, the Kremlin remembers needs to be dealt with before any progress can be made on construction of the nuclear power plant. They're unlikely to have that with China. So I think that's, or at least they don't know if they're going to have that with China, whereas they can be sure that will be, if there's a bad Russian reaction to Kazakh policies, this is almost inevitable, that there'll be a holdup with the nuclear power plant construction.
So let's talk about the flip side, because as you've mentioned, with Russia, it's often the case of coincidence. I don't think so, as cliched as the phrase actually is. But China also has a way of exerting a more subtle influence, for example, by granting credit for infrastructure projects. And later on, obviously, you have to repay this. So you're becoming tied to the Chinese financial system. You're being incentivized to buy into more projects later on, again, by advantageous pricing, the fact that the Chinese companies are already there, so they can offer you further incentives. But is there a risk for Kazakhstan in becoming more and more dependent on China? Do you think that the risk here can be balanced out against the risk of being politically dependent on Russia? Which of these ultimately is the lesser evil?
There is certainly a risk. You're quite right for pointing that out. And I'm sure that's something that Kazakhstan is wondering about. It could be something, again, I mentioned that they jointly produce these fuel bundles in Kazakhstan. Right now, all those are going to China, but the deal is that Kazakhstan can export these, in theory, anywhere they want. It's just a matter of the fact that these bundles, nuclear bundles, are appropriate for for a Chinese nuclear power plant. So they're all going there for the moment. But China, as a partner in that project, China could just insist that they all go there in perpetuity, forever. That all these things that Kazakhstan produces jointly with the Chinese that have to do with nuclear power should all be sold to China and obviously at a very good price, which would undercut the whole meaning of having these things to begin with. Kazakhstan would like to sell these on the open market and depend on the fact that it can get bidders, sell to the highest bidder. That could be totally undercut. China has a lot of other leverage on that too. They could slow down traffic through the middle corridor, or find alternative routes to the middle corridor. They should start building a new railroad that goes through Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan from China this year, which also feeds into the middle corridor. Right now, they're using Kazakhstan because it's the easiest one to do. It's one country. From China to the Caspian Sea, you only have to go through one country and then across and through the South Caucasus and into Europe. But China could decide that they're going to take, like I said, an alternate route. They might start using this new railway that they're building. Now, there's a bunch of things that China could do to force Kazakhstan to kind of come around to the Chinese view. Now, that said, I should also point out that Kazakhstan is in a great position to repay all the loans that China is about to extend to them. They aren't like the other Central Asian countries, and they aren't like a lot of countries that Ross Adam deals with either, where, Russia gives them a $10, $15 billion loan. They know that they're not going to be able to repay this for 20, 30 years, maybe, right? Which also means that Russia gets to cooperate the plant in conjunction with the local nuclear company until the debt is paid. Kazakhstan has enough money that they should be able to pay off all these Chinese loans within 10 or 20 years, I would imagine, too. So that helps them also. But certainly they gotta wonder, great, we have China as a partner, but if we make some decision that seems pro-Western, pro-Russian, pro-Islamic, even, will that anger the Chinese, and will they start making new demands or make political or economic moves which are not to our advantage?
And for China, there are many more opportunities there, not just the nuclear sector. Kazakhstan has vast reserves of copper, has vast reserves of lead, nickel, and China is interested not only in mining, but also in processing. They actually want to help Kazakhstan build processing plants to actually extend the value chain, which is crucial because for the time being Kazakhstan is mostly extracting these metals and minerals but is not really benefiting from the processing. So again, is there a catch there in allowing Chinese companies without any restrictions to build more facilities, which, you know, at the start is going to be a great boon to the labor market, but what comes later, you think?
No, I mean, this is a great point. And this also probably has to do with the low cost of building a nuclear power plant. As China knows that they're going to have these contracts coming up for mining rare raw materials, critical raw materials, are going to come up in Kazakhstan very soon. And they're going to be they have to select somebody to do this. Now, I imagine one could expect anyway that at that point that China would remind Kazakhstan about what a valuable partner China has been to them, giving, for example, this low price on a nuclear power plant. So, you know, don't you think that you should give us the contract to mine lithium or whatever they want to do in Kazakhstan? As far as the production, that's something that all the Central Asian governments are demanding in any of the deals that they make for critical raw materials. They want the company that is going to mine the site to also guarantee that they will invest in facilities that can process these materials so that the Central Asian states are not selling raw materials, but actually the finished product, which is clearly worth a lot more money. So that's not unique specifically to China. It's something that any country or any company is going to have to deal with if they do that. However, you know, again, if you're going to export your critical raw materials and you have the processing plant, what's the easiest way at that point to export your critical raw materials? If you have to go through 5 or 6 countries to get it to its destination, then of course the rates go up all the time. There's customs and tariffs that every country is going to charge. China is one country, the same way as Kazakhstan is one country to get from China to the Caspian Sea. If Kazakhstan wants to export nuclear fuel to South Korea or critical raw materials to South Korea, Japan, anywhere in Asia, it makes more sense for them to export that via China because it's only one country. So there's a lot of things in play here.
So overall, if the European Union and the United States are interested in this market, they had better prepared a really good offer because right now China is actually doing really well on its way to becoming, if not the monopolist, then at least the major player on the market in Kazakhstan and Central Asia. Bruce Pannier was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a collection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Russian authorities have arrested at least 10 over laying flowers throughout the country in honor of deceased opposition figure Alexei Navalny.
Alexei Navalny was seen by many Russians as a symbol of change and hope for a better future. Since his death in a Russian penal colony last year, thousands of Russians have flocked to various memorial sites to pay their respects. Some of them, however, have been punished for these innocent acts of remembrance. For example, Russian police detained 8 people in the town of Novosibirsk, where they were laying wreaths at the monument to victims of political repression on Navalny's birthday. Police presence was also reported around a different monument in the city of St. Petersburg. In the wake of Navalny's arrest and the subsequent branding of his activist network as extremist, many of his allies fled the Russian Federation. Those who remained have faced repressions, including jail time.
Moldova's Prime Minister Dorin Recian has warned that Russia seeks to deploy 10,000 troops to the breakaway region of Transnistria, which has been under the control of pro-Russian separatists since the 1990s.
The Moldovan Prime Minister cited intelligence assessments when referring to Russia's plans to deploy as many as 10,000 extra troops to the region. He has also accused Moscow of interfering with Moldova's upcoming parliamentary elections, with the aim of installing a Kremlin-friendly government that would allow Russia to send those extra soldiers over to Transnistria. According to reports from Chisinau, Russia spent the equivalent of 1% of Moldova's GDP on disinformation and influence campaigns in the country in 2024. Moscow has maintained a modest military presence in Transnistria since the 1990s. Moldova has repeatedly called on Russia to withdraw these forces from the region in a demand backed by a 2018 UN resolution, which Moscow has ignored.
Life goes on, even in times of war. Maybe especially then, as many Ukrainians still need vacations to take their minds off the everyday troubles. Most Ukrainians choose to spend their vacations in their homeland, while others prefer to go far, far away.
The most popular holiday destination for Ukrainians during times of war are Western Ukraine's Carpathian Mountains. The risk of a Russian drone or airstrike is very low in this part of the country, so it is quite safe, and the local resorts, both in the winter and in the summer, have been seeing very high profits. Some Ukrainians still go abroad, however, even though the process has become much harder due to martial law. In most cases, it is women and children who leave the country for such vacations, as men of conscription age are not allowed to leave Ukraine. Interestingly enough, those Ukrainians who do go abroad don't choose neighboring countries. Instead, they go for destinations such as Egypt, Bulgaria or Greece. Even Turkey, once very popular, has seen a steady decline in interest from Ukrainian tourists.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.